Hey, it's Dr. J. And guess what? As I keep saying, on a special day, after Monday, it's Tuesday. And Tuesday is one of my favorite days because we actually get to talk to the great man, Jackson Millan. And my goodness gracious, what he's been sharing in the last 4 weeks has been outstanding. He's made the simple things that he does available to you. And if you actually listen to it a number of times, you'll get an idea that this wealth creation, let's say, recipe is not as difficult when you have someone that knows what they're talking about. And today, I've actually brought up, let's say, a sticky subject, something that will resonate with every single one of you, and it's called super or superannuation. Everyone has it. No one knows what to do with it. We get it when we're old and ugly and we can't use it. So why have it? So with no further ado, we're going to ask the great man to tell us what's that all about. G'day, mate. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here, Steve. I've ramped up the production content this week. So I've got my background all sorted. I've got my fancy lights because I got a little bit of feedback from the SAC crew. They said they just couldn't just stare at me for the entire hour or so. So I needed to spice it up a little bit, mate.
Well, mate, they're usually mesmerised by what you're talking about, and I must say, mate, what you've been saying is you're taking out the things that are scary, and you're putting it into some sort of structure and a plan, which everybody can do. And I really am grateful for you sharing your knowledge with the game, because when we actually make more money and we create that surplus, we need to know what to do with it, because we're never going to get wealthy by just working hard. But there was one thing that you said a couple of weeks ago. There are lots of different ways to create wealth. And there's this hidden thing that we do all the time that is, it's law, it's regulated, and everyone, well, most people do it, and it's called superannuation.
Yeah.
And, young people go, oh, what's that super? Employees just take it and just stick it into a fund, and employers go, darn it, I've got to pay super. But at the end of the day, it's going to be something that's incredibly valuable to us. So I'd love to know your take on superannuation as one big thing to start with.
Yeah, well, I think super gets a really bad rap. And I think, in many cases for good reason, but I think it's an area that most people aren't educated on. And to be fair, it is so complicated that it's an absolute minefield trying to navigate the information that is available to try and get the right answers. So superannuation, I honestly feel, is one of the best things that the Australian government has ever introduced. There are actually many developed countries out there that have an inferior retirement savings system. And we actually have one of the best retirement savings systems in the world. So I think we sometimes take it for granted. What we've got to realise is that superannuation is by far the most tax effective way for you to be able to fund your retirement. Essentially, funding your lifestyle from when you are 60 or older. And today I'm going to cover some of the common misconceptions around superannuation to help educate you around things that you need to be doing to make sure that you can health check your superannuation and make sure that you're actually in the right place, help you understand what you need to be looking for in a good quality superannuation fund, and how to make sure that you're actually on track for retiring financially free and being able to leverage the power of what the superannuation system has created.
It's because there's actually a forced savings, and a lot of people say, I haven't got enough to save. But at the end of the day, if you're working or working for yourself, you've got to be putting things into super. So in essence, it's a secret savings account, isn't it, really?
It is. And I think it's super important, right? Prior to superannuation coming about, there was no legislated or mandatory contributions to go towards retirement. And many people who are uneducated around money and financial planning and wealth creation would just end up spending all of their money. And the reality is that, think about it this way, and I like always to talk about tax. Imagine that the government came out with a tax, an additional tax of 10% that they had to take out of your pay or out of your business every single month. Now, you'd have the shits, right? You'd complain and moan about it, but you'd accept it. You'd cop it, because what's the alternative? You get Crocodile Dundee and you go to jail. So superannuation is essentially the same thing. It's a tax. But it's a tax that is for your benefit as opposed to the government's benefit. And at the moment, it is 9.5% of your income that you receive goes into your retirement savings each and every single month or quarter, depending on your arrangement with your employer. Now, the biggest disservice that when we're talking about self-employed individuals, the biggest disservice that you can do to yourself as a self-employed individual is not contribute to superannuation. because it is a really powerful way to have forced savings to ensure that you can prepare for those later years. Because we've spoken about on this session before, Steve, compounding is a beautiful thing, and it works for the longer that we can allow compounding to work its magic.
So when you say contribute, there's the 9.5 that we must contribute. Are we talking about additional contributions? Because I know by the end of the year, you've actually said, well, you can actually put a big lump sum in there, and you know, you've got a certain amount within a certain period of time, depending on your age, or what you can actually put. Are you saying additional contributions, or
we definitely
the 9.5?
So let's talk about what options we've got. Now, when it comes to superannuation, there are two types of contributions that you can make. One is called a concessional contribution or a pre-tax contribution. This includes your 9.5% that your employer puts in, and essentially any other salary sacrifice that you use that you claim a tax deduction on. Now, a concessional contribution can be a really effective way to contribute to super, because what it is effectively doing is it is reducing your marginal tax rate by the amount that you contribute. So let's say, for argument's sake, that you're earning $95,000 a year and you want to get down into that lower tax bracket. If you contributed an extra $5,000 a year to superannuation, that would allow you to achieve that goal. We also need to consider the consequences and the process we go through around whether we decide to put money into super, but it can be a really effective strategy. In addition to that, when we contribute money to super, it is taxed at a rate of typically 15% on any earnings that it makes. So if you're a high income earner, even that 95 grand, you're paying 39 cents tax on the dollar. So it's a pretty significant differential in terms of tax. The downside is it's preserved and you cannot touch it until you're at least 60. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the bucket strategy, what we spoke about a couple of weeks ago shortly. The second type of contribution we can make is a non-concessional contribution or an after-tax contribution. So Steve, you've earned money, you've paid tax on it already, it's sitting in a bank account. And you've decided that you have nowhere else to put it, nowhere else that you want to invest it, and it is your objective to build your retirement savings. You can contribute that to your super fund. You don't have to pay any additional tax. And the benefit of it is now in a low tax environment for any earnings. So any earnings that portfolio creates, you would pay a much lower rate of tax than what you would pay if you invested personally.
So given that it's going to be earning, now we need to get smart on where it's actually sitting so it maximizes its return. Is that right?
Exactly. Now, let's talk about the limitations of what we can contribute, because superannuation is by far the most tax effective way for you to fund your retirement. And for that reason, the government has been continually limiting the amount of money that we can contribute. Now, way back in the day, we used to be able to contribute a sizable amount to superannuation. There was years in which you can actually put up to $500,000 into your superannuation fund in 1 year. Now, our concessional, our pre-tax contributions is capped at $25,000 a year, including your employer contribution. So for example, if your employer puts in 10 grand a year, you could only put in additional 15. And for non-concessional after-tax contributions, you can only contribute 100,000 a year. So if you breach those caps, if you breach the concessional contributions, anything in excess becomes a non-concessional contribution. And if you breach the non-concessional contributions, you don't want to be in that territory because the tax is ugly, really ugly.
So this comes down to my next question, mate, because you've made it, we've got concessional and non-concessional. We've got certain numbers, and your advisor needs to tell you that because the guys aren't going to remember all those numbers. But guys, what I'm going to get you to do is write this stuff down, because I'm going to strongly recommend you have a chat with Jackson afterwards and see where your superannuation is at. Because as you've heard, it's one of, if not the most effective, tax effective way to create wealth. Now, given that was concessional, non-concessional, how should people look after it?
So let's talk about super funds. Now, super funds get a bad rap, and not all superannuation funds are made the same. Now, what we've got to realize is that there's a common misconception around a question that many people ask. Well, what did your superannuation fund return last year? Now, you've got to realize that the super fund itself is not what's providing the return. So let me explain to you guys the mechanics of how all superannuation funds work.
Yes, because people think it's an investment and they get, let's say, interest, and that's how they make it. And it's a little bit more convoluted than that, isn't it?
It is. So simply, your superannuation fund is a structure for holding money. It is like an administrator. So imagine that you've got an admin person in your business. What does an admin person do? They process paperwork. They deal with all of the operations associated with your business, let's say, for example, or the business that you work in. Now, the administrator is not the one that's producing the returns. They're the one that's just doing the work. Now, so most superannuation funds, your AMPs, MLCs, Australian Supers, Host Pluses, all of these providers, they are an administrator. And their job is to send you paperwork, answer the phone if and when you call, deal with the ATO, provide you with choice. Now, what actually provides the returns is the investment option that you choose. And what we found is that probably 8 out of 10 people that we've spoken to are in the default investment option. It is the stock standard investment option that they've just gone into because they haven't made a choice.
Absolutely, because they don't know what to do. They say, well, what do I do? Here's my super. That's what I do. Here's my money. Look after it. That's it.
Exactly. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to understand that there are a series of fees that all superannuation funds have. And typically speaking, there are 3 fees that we can get charged. The first fee is the admin fee. It's what we pay the administrator for doing the admin. Sometimes that's a flat dollar fee and it can be as little as $100 a year. Sometimes it can be a percentage fee, and we've seen some of them anywhere up to 0.75%, which is very, very high. Now, the second fee is the investment fee. Every investment option that you choose typically will have a different fee. General rule of thumb is the more defensive the investment option, the less risk it takes, the lower the fee, and the more aggressive, the higher the fee. Now, the fee doesn't necessarily determine how good the investment option is. And the third fee is any insurance premiums that you pay. Now, by default, most superannuation funds have insurance within them. It is their responsibility to their members to give you some level of insurance. That can be a fantastic thing. But we've seen for some clients, either their insurance is sometimes no good, very, very difficult to claim on, or secondly, they might be double dipping. We've seen many clients that have multiple policies without sometimes them even knowing. Now, a general rule of thumb is that when you add up the admin fee and the investment fee, that should not exceed 1% of your superannuation balance.
Oh, that's gold. So if people went back to their super, and I'm sure they get a statement, they should look at the admin fee and investment fee, and it shouldn't be more than
Here's
one.
the thing, Steve. The statement won't tell you.
Oh, geez, is that right? Obviously, I look at the amounts and see what the return is, but I never got the statement. You read my mind. I don't get a statement.
This is the problem. The superannuation industry, most of the collateral that they send you are marketing tools. And they try and make it so complicated to retain you as a member. So what you need to do is you need to call your superannuation fund and ask them the questions. So I would like to get a fund rundown of my superannuation fund. I would like to find out, what is the admin fee? Is it a dollar fee? Is it a percentage fee? Is it both? What is the investment fee? Are there any other fees that I'm paying, like advisor fees, transaction fees, any other fees at all? And try your best to get them all in percentage form unless there's flat dollar fees. Now, add them all together and work out where you're at. We've seen some clients that are paying fees upwards of 3%.
300% more than they should be.
Sometimes
200% more than percent they should be, yeah. 200.
So give you an example. We've got some superannuation funds that we've been able to secure for our clients that pay less than 0.7% of all of the fees. Now, I'm going to give you an example, Steve. And guys, you can do this yourself. Jump onto the Money Smart website. It's a government website created by ASIC. And you can search for the superannuation calculator. Now, I'm going to plug a couple of numbers in here just to give you a general view. This is obviously not the same situation for everyone, but I'm just going to give you an example. So let's say you're 40 years old. You're making $80,000 a year and you want to retire at 65. Your current superannuation balance is $100,000 and you're contributing 9.5%. Let's say, for argument's sake, your admin fee is $105 a year and 0.3% per annum. And your investment option is a balanced option that on average returns 8% and has a fee of 0.7%. Okay. So all in all, you're paying a little bit over 1%. Now, by the time you get to 65, your super balance would be $465,000 and you would have paid your super fund $93,102 in fees.
Oh my goodness gracious me.
Now, I'll give you another example. If we go to a low-cost industry fund as an example, not always the right fit for everyone, but we have a fee a profile closer to about that 0.7%. And let me just work this out for you. That would increase our retirement savings from 465,000 to 492,000, and would reduce our fees from 93,000 to 65,000. That's nearly $30,000 in fees between now and retirement. And what would you do with an additional $30,000?
Well, is that those are, let's say, the 465 with $93,000 fees? Are the fees usually taken out of the return?
No, well, they're taken out of your balance. So normally, yeah, they were going to take them out of the returns, and that can impact obviously what return that you receive. And look,
Your compounding goes down because there's high fees.
That's it. Similar to how compounding works when you're investing, the higher the return we're getting and the more that we can contribute, the bigger the snowball is. Superannuation fees will work in the complete opposite, that the lower the fees, the better outcome you're typically going to be. Because once again, another misconception, Steve, is that many people go chasing returns. Previous returns, historical returns, are never an indicator for future returns. And we've actually proven it, we've backtested this, that sometimes these super funds and investment portfolios that have been the best performers in one year are often in the lowest quartile in terms of returns the next year. Nearly 100% of the time, the highest performing fund is never the highest performing fund the following year. So we actually try and look for our clients to get them consistent portfolios, ones that aren't shooting the lights out, that are on can boom and bust. We look for investments that give us consistency, because think about it. If you lose 10% one year, you've got to make 20% the next year to get back to square one. So we need to make sure that we've got consistency on our journey.
It's a great word, consistency. It's in actually everything, isn't it? Consistency is the key. Now, so we've found out that we'll be looking after. We've got to find out our admin fee, investment fee, any other fees, and make sure it's around about that 1%, and make sure that we make some adjustments accordingly. Now, I think you've covered it just briefly, but I'd like to just do a bit of a deep dive. How come everybody take their super, because it is locked away, how can they use it to build wealth?
So the big thing is about understanding your tolerance to risk and what you're trying to achieve. So in this particular example, Steve, that I just gave you, let's assume that we optimize this client's portfolio, okay? So we find them a lower cost fund, potentially we save them 30,000. In actually some cases, I've helped clients save anywhere from 100 to 150,000 in combined fee savings.
Incredible.
We optimize that. No one's going to be able to retire on 492,000.
No.
So let's say that we go, okay, well, what would we need to contribute? Let's say, for argument's sake, that we decided to contribute an extra $500 per month.
Now, hang on a tick. So this has to be reviewed by someone that knows what they're talking about, isn't
Correct.
it? Now, just to digress here just for one moment, just keep that $500 in the back of your mind. In the past, I've actually heard advisors, and I'm talking about financial advisors, right? You're not financial advisors, I understand that. But they've said, I'll just put it in this super. We'll do a self-managed. We'll help manage the portfolio ins and outs. And all of a sudden, it goes pear-shaped. I've not seen a lot that have been self-managed or managed by externals, which just set and forget. It's not a set and forget, is it, when it comes down to that type?
I'm going to share a couple of things with you guys, and I think this is going to really paint a picture for you. But quick question to you guys. Could you afford an extra $500 a month to carve out of your existing strategy and contribute to super?
That's about $120 a week.
There you go. If you do that alone between the ages, say 40 and 65, that would increase your retirement savings from that 495 that we were talking about to 685,000.
Wow. Nearly 300,000.
$500. Now, what if we could do 1,000? If we did 1,000 a month, that would now take us to about 877,000. And if we went to the maximum of the cap, so we went as high as we possibly could, which would be in this particular scenario, an extra $1,450 a month, which is quite a lot of money. that would get us to over $1 million in retirement savings. Imagine if you and your partner did that. Potentially $2 million of retirement savings combined. You would be very, very comfortable.
But that's a way of actually having a plan to increase the contributions over a period. I'm sure it'll be amortized, for instance. So
exactly.
It goes from X amount to Y, and that's how we can actually create wealth through it. That's incredible.
And what we need to work out is start with the end in mind, Steve, because I think most people have heard lots of different numbers thrown around. Do I need $1 million? Do I need 1.5? What number do I need? Stop running everyone else's race and trying to keep up with the Joneses. Work out based on that personal profit and loss that we did a number of weeks back when we first started this series. Work out what your life costs now. Remove all of the stuff that's not going to be there by the time you get to your golden years. Add on all of the nice stuff, the cruises, going overseas, the entertainment, all of these other things you want to do because hopefully you're going to have a bit more time on your hands, and work out how much you need on a monthly basis or a yearly basis to live your ideal lifestyle. Now, in my experience with most of our retiree clients, that number tends to be around about 75 grand a year after tax to around about 100 grand a year. So between 1,500 and 2 grand a week on average. And we find that for most people who are in that kind of range, they need around about 1.5 million in combined retirement savings to be comfortable.
Okay, so everyone, you're in your 20s, 30s and 40s, this is a great time to start doing it. If you're a little bit older, like myself, we need to sort of say, well, what do we need to do with a number of different things and get some advice? But I'm just going to wave a red flag, and I know you wouldn't. I'm suggesting you get some coaching with this area and not just sit around and just say, I'm going to go to the bank and their financial advisors will give you the results. From my experience, I just put myself in my bubble. That hasn't worked for me. The only thing that's worked for me is having people that know what they're talking about, have done it before, and then help me along the way. So just a bit of a red flag there, guys.
So important. And look, I think here's the thing, guys, that it was famously said by Warren Buffett and by Bill Gates. People overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10 or 20. And the longer you leave this, the harder it is going to be for you to bridge the gap between where you are now and where you ideally want to be. So it doesn't matter if you are starting later, you might be in your 50s or you might even be in your 60s. It just means that there's probably going to be more work that you need to do to be able to bridge that gap than others. But if you are younger, then start now.
Yes,
and it doesn't need to be huge. We can always increase these things over time.
I was in school and they used to talk about super and investments and so forth. And we used to sit at the back of the class and just looking around because we didn't know what we didn't know. We weren't being advised by, well, I wasn't being advised by other people that said, well, hang on a tick. In your age, if you had this right, it's going to change your life. No one actually said that. They just 100%. Gave us, you should get this and you should get that, walked out. So, guys, I'm saying listen to this. If you're a youngster, you're in your 20s, you're starting out in business, in your 30s, in your driving years, this is a time to stop, reboot, and look at the big picture. 100%. All right.
Now let's talk about that previous point that you mentioned, Steve, in terms of either palming off your funds to somebody else or even setting up a self-managed superannuation fund and trying to actively manage your wealth yourself.
This is a faux pas that I see happen regularly, but I'd love to know what your take on it all is.
I researched this extensively and I wrote about it in my book, and we studied this across the entire world and we worked out what were the statistics. Now, there is a report that's updated on a regular basis that's called the SPIVA report, SPIVA. And what this SPIVA report does is it is a comparison report that compares the benchmark index, so what the market has done on average without anybody doing any active management, just for the average of how all of the companies have performed, compared to active managers and how they've performed respectively. Now, an active manager is somebody who is trying to trade and pick the market to try and outperform. Now, over a 15-year period, Steve, if you had to guess what percentage of people were able to outperform the market between 0 and 100%, what would be your guess?
10%?
It's about that. So we worked out, depending on the sector, and I'll actually share my screen and I'll show this to you guys. And this is a report that was done by SPIVA showing active funds against their benchmarks in the US over 15 years from 2005 to 2020. Domestic funds, 88% underperform the market. In the real estate sector, 81%. In multi-cap, so that basically means across lots of different areas of asset allocation, 89% underperformed, 82, 87, 91, 90, 81, 82, 81, 86, 88. Now, I'm not a gambling man, but for potentially a 12 to 20% probability of outperformance over a 15-year period, those aren't good odds to me.
No.
So this just proves that all of these people that are promising you these outlandish, crazy returns, promising you that they're going to outperform the market, it's all a fugazi. What we need to understand is that we need to stick to the tried and true stuff that works. And we believe in similar principles to what the Barefoot's spoken about for years, is that index and passive-based investing is not only cheaper, it's not only more efficient and provides us with more diversification, but over 80% of the time, it outperforms all of those suits that are trying to outperform the market. No offense to suits, Steve, but everyone knows what I'm talking about. So stick to the basics, the fundamentals that work, because when it sounds too good to be true, it often is.
So when someone has a super, and they're getting advice on what to do with it, and we'll come to some different types in a moment. What would be the biggest mistake you see people making with it right now?
Biggest mistake is that they are choosing investment options following trends in the market. They are following sheep mentality. We call this the cycle of emotions when it comes to investing. They are doing the polar opposite of what it takes to make money in the market. They are selling when the market is low, and they're buying when the market is high. For example, in the global financial crisis, people who were invested in, say, a balanced fund that had about 70% allocation to growth markets, that fell by 30 or 40%. And then they moved all their money to cash because they were afraid. And then when the market started to recover, they then went back into equities. And they've continued to do that, and it's cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars in opportunity. Whereas good investors, people who understand the market, they follow Warren Buffett's mantra: be fearful when others are greedy, and be greedy when others are fearful. So when the market is falling, it's actually a tremendous opportunity to buy good quality investments. And then when the market's at its peak, it doesn't necessarily mean we should be selling, but we should be cautious around what we should be buying. Next mistake people make is that they are changing their funds on a whim. You should not do anything unless you have taken the time to be educated. So just because the Barefoot says that Host Plus is the best superannuation fund, don't take that response blindly, because it is not a one size fits all. Take some time, a couple of hours, read a copy of my book where I talk around all of the fundamentals of how to actually research a good superannuation fund, and learn these for yourself so you can do your own due diligence, and then you can partner with somebody who can give you the right advice. You don't necessarily have to do all of this for yourself, but you need to know a little bit about it so that you can make better decisions.
So a bit of education, and then working with someone that can give you the advice, because, you know, if you're a great plumber, if you're a great singer or whatever the case may be, you want someone to give you advice on what to do. You need to surround yourself with experts that are cleverer than yourself. And when it comes to money, I believe you've got to pick the right ones.
Correct. And the third thing is the number one lever that you can pull in terms of fueling your retirement savings is contributions. I know it's so boring, guys. It's really boring. And it goes for all of your wealth creation. The number one lever that you can pull is how much you contribute to your wealth creation, because it is not the investment that you pick that is going to make you wealthy. That has a very small impact in the grand scheme of things. Of course, we want something that performs and is consistent, but we don't need 20% returns. We need to contribute, and your contributions will have a more significant impact in your overall wealth journey, both building wealth personally and building wealth for retirement through your super, than the investment option that you pick.
So to put that into perspective then, what's the difference between a standard superannuation and what, someone you know very well, and I know you speak the same language, I was talking about wholesale super, which has different types of fee structure, which are lower and so forth. So there's standard and there's wholesale.
Yep. So there's really, I guess, 4 realms of super that we can play in. Your retail super is kind of your off-the-shelf, over-the-counter superannuation. So typically, if you go into a bank branch, and they try and push you into a superannuation fund, that's normally going to be a retail fund, and they're normally more expensive because there's a price for convenience. And wrongly, the banks are doing it and taking advantage of their clients, which I believe that it should be outlawed, but that's a conversation for another time. Second one is we've got wholesale superannuation. So there are certain superannuation funds that you can only get through an advisor or a wealth coach. Essentially, because we have so many clients and we have the ability to take a certain amount of volume to certain providers, they are able to provide us with discounted pricing and access to a wider range of features and benefits than you can get yourself. Third option is industry funds. And industry funds are pretty good. They do have their limitations. They are typically quite simple in their construction, but for many people, simple is fine. And you don't necessarily need to have a lot of complexity. And then the fourth option is a self-managed superannuation fund. This is reserved for very sophisticated investors or for individuals that have high superannuation balances, have the acumen and the understanding to be able to run the fund for themselves. And typically the minimum barrier to entry for a self-managed super fund is having around $300,000 in retirement savings to even consider doing it.
So when you say industry funds, is that something like Telstra or Rest? Or what's an industry fund?
Yep, it would be like your Rests, your Host Plus, your CBUS, your First State Super, these types of funds. These would be industry funds. They're typically quite cheap, although many of these industry funds do are more expensive. So they're not all made the same.
No. So from what you're telling us, if we got your advisor, your coach, your wealth coach to say, well, hang on a tick, let's look at your fees and so forth. And guys, go and do a bit of homework and find out what your fees are and what your admin is. And then we bring it to the table, speak to Jackson and the crew here and say, what could we do? Now, remember, they are wealth coaches and they could probably access to the wholesale stuff, which is, again, even at a better level. Is that right?
Yeah, well, once again, we can review all of these options for you and actually show you side by side of what are the pros, what are the cons, and also give you the right advice around which of these options are actually right for your specific situation.
Did you get your little spreadsheet out, the thing that we were typing up there, and show them what their 40 to 65 ratio of 80,000?
We've got software that we can do all of that, Steve, so a little bit more powerful than a spreadsheet. And look, the other great thing is that, as we know, anything financial services, the legal terms and conditions are so long and arduous. And we've got access to some quite expensive software that actually condenses all of that into easy to understand side-by-side comparisons. So it's going to make it a whole lot easier for you guys to be able to do that research. We'll help educate you through the process and then help you make the right and informed decision that's going to help you push the needle forwards on your wealth journey.
Right. Well, look, guys, I hope you've taken some notes here. There's a lot of action points. I'm going to get Jackson now just to summarize some proactive outcomes and things you need to do. So, mate, if we want to get these guys onto a good, strong terra firma with their super and obviously other things, but today's about super, what are 3 things that they need to do like straight away this week?
Yep. So first things first, make sure that you check to see if you've got any lost super hanging around. So go into MyGov and make sure that you link your ATO to your MyGov account. And under the MyGov, you can actually see any superannuations that are linked to your tax file number. And we've had many clients discover that they've had superannuation that started to get wheeled away that they completely forgot about. With that information, then go and contact your superannuation funds, ask for a fund rundown, and go through the fees, the features, the benefits. So at least then you can get an understanding of what you're working with and essentially give you some options to then start moving forward. The third thing is that take super seriously. It is one of the most tax-effective ways that you can fund your retirement. You just need to leverage it appropriately. You need the right strategy, you need the right platform, and you need the right execution. So understand what is it that your retirement is going to look like? What would you like it to look like? And let's work backwards and create a roadmap for you so you can have certainty around being able to live a comfortable lifestyle in retirement. And it's something we need to start working on now, not later. Because the longer you leave it, the harder it's going to become.
Yeah, tomorrow never comes. So I remember in most sessions, you've been saying it's critical to have that plan in place, and then we can create wealth strategies on top of it. And this is one bucket. So that's
Exactly. And to give you guys an example, whenever we take on a new client, we help them get 6 things in order, which we call the financial foundations. It's the 6 things that I'm sure all of you have had on your bucket list of things to do for many, many years. It's getting your cash flow sorted, getting your debt strategy in place, sorting out your super and your investments, creating your emergency fund, sorting out your risk management strategy, and getting your wills and estate planning finalized. They are the top 6 things that most people want to get done and never get around to doing it because it's too complex. They don't have the time. They're paralyzed by fear of just not knowing what information to use. And so for most of our clients, we get those 6 things done in the first 6 weeks of them working with us. So imagine ticking all those things off your list.
That'd be awesome. A lot of let's say, get the hard stuff out of the way. Now let's look at creating wealth.
Exactly.
And it's been amazing today. I mean, it is a minefield. It's something that you've covered and given guys some action points. I think it's wonderful that they can say, sit down, scrub through this again and take some major action. And one of the things I'm going to suggest once they've done it, and guys, I'm striking straight to you now. Once you've done those things that Jackson's told you to do, especially find out what your annual fees are and what your investment is, book some time to have a conversation. Take the opportunity to hear from an expert, put into that fancy software and see what you need. Because if you don't know what you don't know, you'll never get what you've always wanted. So Jackson, thanks so much for joining us today. It's always fantastic. And I hope the guys get hold of you. And guys, I'll put the details in there, click the button, send them an email, do the damage. So thanks, buddy.
Happy to help, mate.
Guys, don't you love it? When a guy knows his stuff and he can tell you, and a team that knows their things that you need to do, it takes a lifetime to find them. It's like finding a great mechanic. You don't have to go back and get your car repaired. When you find someone who understands money and actually makes it simple for all of us to understand, I think it's a blessing. So I strongly recommend that you have a conversation with Jackson or his team to just get this super stuff sorted out. And then you've got a proactive strategy to put into place because you're all going to be paying it, so you may as well do it right. All right, guys? Well, I'm Dr. J, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.